Hello, welcome to Doomer Optimism. Today, Nate and I, old buddy Nate, you recognize him, right? Host of many podcasts, so requires really little introduction, unless he wants to introduce himself again. Nate, do you want to introduce yourself again? Okay, even if you said yes, I'd say no. But really, why we're here is we want to talk to Nigel Best. Nigel has been a longtime mutual of both of us on Twitter. Uh, just great account. Post this is my sense from your account. You post a mixture of like very practical things of what you're doing. You're a woodworker, you're a farmer, and then you also post a lot of just really interesting idea posts that sometimes are a bit hard to follow. Often the words you use are very interesting, but in general I always get a kick out of what you're saying, and I find it also very insightful oftentimes. So yeah, and so both Nate and I just wanted to get you on. We think you're doing a lot of cool stuff and saying a lot of cool stuff. So welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today? Do you want to? We were talking about the weather before recording. Should we start with the weather conversation? How's the
The
weather
weather,
over there in Missouri?
weather's great, crispy. It's been we had a little rain over the weekend. Always appreciate the rain. Been a dry, hot fall. I don't think the drought monitor accurately reflects what's happening to my ponds and conditions in general. And it seems like everything was more or less north of I-70. I'm probably 40 miles south of I-70. The Missouri River kind of bisects the state, and the weather pattern usually runs north or south of that. And so a lot of the weather, some of my mutuals just north of Kansas City got a lot of rain this year, and things are great. My pond's down 5 feet, and things are a little dry. It was better than 2 years ago, but still. So we're finally getting a little bit of rain. It's just a month late. We could have used some September freshening on the grass. We'll be short grass. That's farmer stuff.
Yeah.
So you're south of I-70?
Yeah, probably 40 miles, maybe 30 miles as the crow flies, near Whiteman Air Force Base. Um, 75 miles southeast of Kansas City, so kind of west central, but south I-70.
I think I might have visited that Air Force base. I once had a job where I had to do site visits for an engineering firm, and I think I might have visited that base, and so I might have driven in that area. I'm not
Yeah,
totally sure it was that base.
sort of on the edge of where the prairie runs into the Ozark Mountains. So we're fairly rolling ground here. There's still crop ground in the neighborhood. There's some stuff that shouldn't get cropped, but Harry Truman Reservoir is a large lake 10 miles south of me, and it runs into Lake of the Ozarks, which is the next lake down. I'm 26 miles from the headwaters of the Lake of the Ozarks, sort of running into the hills and the flint rock and the red clay from the black dirt and the soil of the Missouri River Valley.
Um, so yeah, do you want to just kind of start by introducing yourself? What's your background? What led you to where you are today, and what are you mostly up to with your time today? Or these?
Well, yeah, it's sort of awkward for me. I'll try to get through it. I grew up in a small town about 26 miles from here. Uh, it with my mother and my two sisters, and an occasional brother that stayed with us. Didn't know my father growing up. Agricultural community, a lot of crop ground, a little tough. We're always financially strapped, and but I had a great grandmother in town there that was pretty influential to me, and she was born in 1900, Grandma Mary. And then I got about 3 solid years with my maternal grandfather, and that was pretty influential when I was 5 to 8 years old. And kind of, you're picking your own role models, but there were good folks in town, guys that would try to chip in and help out, but it was a little tough. And so I'd mow grass with my older brother and start chipping in financially with mom and the girls. And probably around 12, my former little league baseball coach got me hired on with the local hog farmer, and I was a farm laborer for a commercial hog farm, large commercial hog farm operation. And I would feed chores in the morning and feed chores in the evening there. Equipment was run down. The son had just gotten back from college and was just starting to modernize it a little bit. So the equipment was run down. They were scaling. Things were a little out of control. And they were generous to me, but finding a place to work and a way to generate use was the way I kind of dealt with what was going on at home. I was able to make a little money, chip in with the family. The hog farmer would give me a pig every Christmas, a new pair of Carhartt overalls or whatever, what they were keys at the time probably. And I just kind of worked my way through that, through all the way through high school. I worked on the hog farms. I worked on the dairy. I thought I was going to go to town and get a town job, and I lasted about 2 weeks in a restaurant bussing tables, and I went straight back and worked at a dairy after that. Just worked through high school. Between my junior and senior year in high school, I joined the National Guard and did basic training my senior summer, and then came back and finished that up and was in the guard unit for a little bit while I was right after high school. So, little guard time. Tried DeVry Institute of Technology for electrical engineering for a year. Was building up debt, not doing great at that. Loading trucks for UPS while I was taking, 3 trimesters is the way they, you just go year round. And so I just decided to go active duty Army. Signed up, left the guard unit, and switched over from combat engineer to medic. So I went to medic training in San Antonio and got stranded in a hospital there working in the emergency room, and that's where I met my wife. So I think I had 5 years of soldier time, and then I met my wife, and it was like, well, swords to plowshares. I just went and told her. She was an officer and I was enlisted, and I told our head nurse of the department that I'd met this nurse and I was going to marry her and was going to end my Army career. We had a couple of daughters, started doing contracting work, built a horse barn, bartered my way up. We've always kept rabbits and chickens since the early 90s, whether we were in town or out of town, wherever we were at. Lived in New York for a spell, then ended up on near Fort Bragg in Fayetteville, North Carolina before we came home. So just did a soldier thing. She got out. We came home and do this. So
Where
here it
did
is here.
how did you get into woodworking? So you posted some of your woodworking. You do these like spiral staircases, just really great work, really
Yeah,
beautiful work. How did you get into that?
well, I started building stuff with. I mentioned my grandfather when I was a little kid. We would cut out plate steel stoves with like Black and Decker jigsaws in the garage, and we'd just get some 1/4 inch plate steel and a can of oil, and I'd cut out the draft holes and the doors. And so I've been just doing things with my hands the whole time. Woodworking has the lowest barrier to entry. So, if you've got a pouch and a hammer and a skill saw, or you can run a broom, you can get on a construction site and you're working with dead plants, and you're building things. And so it was pretty autodidact. We did, I had industrial arts in high school, did that, but I was welding on the pig farm at 12, fixing gates and things like that. So I keep reverting to welding. I bounced back and forth between mechanics and welding and woodwork. When I got out of the Army, I installed a set of replacement windows in trade for a work truck. Then we built the barn, built a horse barn for a client. And then every time I had any extra money, I acquired tools. And I got into when we moved to New York, I walked onto the framing crew, and within 6 months, I was a punch list carpenter doing odd jobs around that job site. And then I was working building custom homes and working for my trimmers on the weekends. It just you could with a pencil and a square and a saw, you can go about anywhere and make a living with it. And I'm just pretty good with my hands, so that just evolved. When we're in North Carolina, that's close to Southern Pines, Pinehurst, Fayetteville is, which is Fort Bragg. And so there's quite a bit of work in the Southern Pines, Pinehurst area. So I would trim houses, then the stairs were always a problem. So I would take on stair projects, repair entry door systems, and eventually build entry door systems, and just did it. There's just so much room in that industry
Yeah.
you don't have to have super equipment in order to do a lot of that stuff. It's not real capital intensive.
Yeah,
There's kind of a narrative, just to follow up on that real quick, and then Nate, I'll let you get a word in. There's kind of a narrative among kind of young men these days, at least online, maybe not in real life, that there's like no opportunities for them, that the boomers had it all very cushy and they're not sharing their wealth. And there's a lot of whining about it. Um, it seems like, from your story, you certainly didn't have it any easier than they do. I don't think you had more opportunities than they did. They probably have more opportunity if they put their mind to it. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about this young generation and, either what they've been denied or what's stopping them from becoming productive young men and getting married and buying a house and all of this stuff?
Well, I don't recommend to come up hard as a strategy, because I've got a lot of friends that ended up in prison or didn't make it or
Right.
broken, so I just, I don't think we do well with a glut. And I just think things are pretty easy. You know, they condescended shop class in the 80s when I was a kid and we were going into it. And so the educational industrial complex was shoving us the college route, starting to offer credit cards in 88, and everybody had to go to college, and the kids that weren't college bound were idiots, but high school was pretty dumb. And so if a guy could go out and cut firewood or haul hay or work crops, drive a combine at 15, and make real money, there wasn't much reason, for them to be present in high school. But they were starting to do right around 90, they were starting to do televised physics classes from Oklahoma State University were coming into the classroom. They were old TVs, but they were trying to bring that in and get everybody on this college track. I hate victims. A person that perceives themselves as a victim is not doing themselves or anybody any favor. But that's where I put the primary part of it. They made debt easy. They condescended the working trades, and so but things have gone pretty well. It's pretty easy, I mean, kids, we've all got air conditioning. Everybody lives pretty well, There's a couple kids in a trailer around here that are doing poorly. So I don't know. I mean, it's just like a delayed adulthood, I had to get out. I couldn't wait to go. And I just don't, I mean, when I first started self-teaching myself the advanced woodwork stuff in the late 90s, I had to buy books from Taunton Press, and I had to get Fine Woodworking magazine, and I had to scratch and try to figure that stuff out. I didn't have YouTube or any of this stuff. The power tools were clumsier. First starting carpentry in the 80s, we didn't have carbide tip saw blades. You were using high-speed steel saw blades, which blunted almost immediately, and things didn't work, and the tools weren't ergonomic. And now, man, even with $500, you can go into a Lowe's or a Home Depot and you can be set. You're in business, and there's just no go. If there's a criticism of the boomers, just typical generational crap. They left a lot of the Gen Xers to their own devices. We were feral, and by the time that the later kids, these younger kids, have come along, the people I learned from were my grandparents. Born 1922, born 1900. Those are the people I hung out with early on that kind of got me set in the right direction. It wasn't the guys born in 1945 to 60, because they were free loving and not present and doing their own thing. And so if I've got a gripe, it's that. But I don't know. I mean, ultimately, it's never been easier. It's just hard because kids have been shoved down this track. They've been, if you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then it's laid out in front of you and you will get your 401k and you will retire rich, and you'll be good. And then it doesn't work out,
Yeah.
It just, then what do
Yeah, I
you
It's
think
do?
really not working out. I think everybody tried to do that, and now it's like people are realizing that a lot of that economy is fake anyway. There's a lot of bullshit jobs, and two, it's just overproduction of the elites, right? And so a lot of people are pretty down about that. And I think a lot of people are taking an interest in the trades again as well.
They
That's
were
what I'm
sold a
seeing.
bill of goods. I mean, you were sold
Yeah.
a bill. And I
I
don't.
was too. I mean, I was pushed to go to college. I was wondering if I wanted to go to college. My dad was like, "Of course you're going to college, right? You should get into computers." That was it. Yeah.
That's probably actually good advice around that time, but you know,
Yeah, maybe.
it
I
seems
didn't
like a
go
lot of
into
those.
computers. Maybe that's my problem.
That's it. Yeah, you'd be doing fine now.
I don't know if
Yeah.
I'd be happy though, but
Yeah,
I'd be doing fine financially. Yeah.
yeah. I think that's that's all really interesting. I didn't kind of expect this turn, but like I like what you were saying about education, and I think that this idea of um yeah, you're supposed to get on a path. You do this path, then you get your job. Like there's this linear career path you're supposed to take. And in the meantime, we forgot kind of how to like actually be useful at things in the world, and that primarily is the most important thing. It's not to like do something so that someone else thinks you're good and gives you a pat on the head and a few dollars. Like it's like you have to. How do you be useful?
Well, and
We
I
have
guess you
had.
have to define what that use is. What is useful? You
Yeah.
know, I don't know. For me, it's food, shelter, and procreation. First principles. If you can't resolve those problems, and you should know how to do that by 8th grade. I mean, effectively every citizen ought to be able to handle those 3 things, or at least the 2 big ones, the food and shelter. The third will come. And
You'll
if you
figure that
don't
out on your own.
understand, yeah, I mean, it happens, but it's the food and shelter thing as a first principle, you know, and as literally as possible.
Yeah.
It's kind
So
of,
this is I want to bring in too to so we had many people know um about 8 months ago my family we live on the farm um do grazing regenerative grazing we've just been doing that 7 or 8 years, and this end of the winter last year our house burned to the ground. um and I bring that up because it sort of ties in exactly to what you said. One of the things we found a contractor right away because I'm still trying to work and things like that, and I wasn't about to learn how to build a house. We needed to get in a house quick. So we have a good contractor we know and hired him, but it's been a neat thing because we homeschool both of our kids. And Quinn's doing like a lot of class at the junior college now, but Miles, my 14-year-old, he got hired on by our contractor, and so he works from 8 to 12 every morning building the house. And so he's learning all that stuff, and like what you said of you spend your extra money on tools. We went, he was like going to Farm King and buying, he was getting Dickies and Carhartts for himself with his paycheck, and he's trying to decide if he wants to be a DeWalt or a Milwaukee guy when he buys tools for himself. And it's just what he's learning doing this, and obviously it's a unique situation. Um, it's just invaluable. It's the coolest thing ever to see him like thrive at it, earn a paycheck, learn skills that are really useful, like these first principles you're talking about, especially, Quinn's really into the cattle. Miles likes the building. It's like, so that's been a focus for us too, is how to do practical things, how to be a person in the world. Not just like, um, it seems like so much of what passes for education today is, I don't know. I could complain more about it, but you know what I mean.
there's so many bright people. Like one of the best board certified ER physicians I ever worked with put himself through school working like construction labor all summer. So he'd do his two classes, 8 years of training or whatever. He'd go and he would work all summer, work up enough cash that he could pay for his school and his boarding over the winter. You know, super grounded guy. If he talks to a contractor as a rich doctor, he's not going to get rolled because he knows what's going on. He's dragged his knuckles through it. And I just think that all kids ought to do that before they leave high school. And then, do your advanced. You should be able to know a lot of that by 8th grade. And then you can either go your advanced math route. I know so many people with advanced math degrees that can't put debits on the left and credits on the right when it comes to balancing a checkbook. It's going to be the most fundamental thing. It will have the greatest impact on their entire lives. And they can't read an amortization schedule on a loan, or they can't balance checkbook. And you should know that stuff. You'd be exposed to it at least by 8th grade. And if we were doing that, and then kids would scrub through labor a little bit during the summers, that would have just, we had to scratch that stuff together when we were kids. A lot of us. I still know kids that were my age that never figured that stuff out, and they rolled through and they did all right. So I just think that having that practical experience is huge. I'm sorry your house burnt down to get it.
Yeah.
They may not have had that experience had that not happened. Running around with hay bales with dad on the farm isn't the same as working on a construction crew with men that aren't your dad.
Mhm.
That's a big deal. I think it's important to kick the kids out and get them to work on a crew if possible, and not to be gender based about it, but young guys working with old crotchety older guys, it's a little bit of a taste of the world, and there's nothing wrong.
I want to rope in before we keep expanding this conversation about you also run cattle, right? Do you want to talk about how you got into that? How you like what's your strategy in terms of, I know you're kind of interested in regenerative grazing and stuff as well. How did you get into cattle and also kind of the regenerative grazing, moving them around and all of that?
Right. Well, I mean, as we dragged through urban areas, I followed my wife, stayed in the military for a spell after I got out. So from 95 to '01 or so, we lived in New York. Then we lived in North Carolina. Always kept rabbits and chickens wherever we went, wherever we could. I focused more on hunting and fishing during those years. All my stuff was just food based, man. I don't like being hungry. So I'd go out and find a source of food, find some shelter, get enough coin in my pocket so that we weren't wanting anything. And then we came back to Missouri, which gave me the opportunity, came back to the hometown where my father grew up. I met him my senior year of high school, and we had communicated for about 13 years while I was out and about. And he ran a cabinet shop here while I was doing my thing back east in North Carolina. And I wanted to slow down and get the kids out of town. I knew in '99, before Bush was elected, that my wife needed to get out of the military because she was going to end up overseas. And I had two daughters, in diapers at times during those years. And I was like, man, we got to slow down. So I came home, did more hunting and fishing for the first few years, but around '07, '08, my youngest daughter was hell-bent on getting horses. And so if they were going to get horses, I was going to get 5 goats. So we built fence all that summer, and then they got the horses. That lasted about 2 weeks, and they were disinterested, but I had the goats. So I got
Nice.
the goats, and later that year, I got my first cow-calf pair. And we were in a little urban lot here in the small town, and just vertical ground and hobbyist stuff, but just brutal. They'd knocked fences down, ended up in trouble. And in 12, we ended up buying a farm east of town with about 76 acres. Was able to stretch out a little bit. Kept retaining heifers, adding one or two here cheap, peddling one once in a while, a calf or whatever, trying to build a herd. When we took on the farm, we got 10 more cows with that. I was up to 7 or 8 head from the first cow-calf pair by that time. Bought 6 heifers, and I've never bought another cow until I guess last year, the year before. But I kept building numbers, and we're about 40 head now on 76 acres, which is pretty tight. We're running 25 pairs, so I'm having to cull old ones. I'm having to raise new ones. It takes 3 years to get a calf up with a calf on it that's doing something. You try to have that first calf by 2 years. Took an EQIP grant in 2012 because everything aligned with what I wanted to do. The year that we bought the farm, we went ahead and applied for that. It was a competitive grant. We subdivided the 76 acres into 12 paddocks, installed 4 water points that they all pinwheeled from so that we could rotate them. And we're doing fairly moderate grazing, not true 3-day rotations probably per 5-acre paddock roughly. And we've been doing that mostly since. I've been selling most of the calves into the sale barn. I sell some customs, but I'm also a custom woodworker, and I've got custom customers that I have to deal with and have to work 60 hours a week at that, trying to educate customers on the beef, trying to raise a beef to the 30 months it takes on grass to finish, or 24 months with a little supplementation or better seasons. Trying to do both of those just a bit much. So we've sold into the barn quite a bit. I'm a little ethically challenged about that, but they do get a good life while they're here. I usually carry the calves over. We primarily fall calved, so we carry the calves over to the next fall as stockers because we're rich on grass for the first half of the summer. So I take them in a little heavier, a little older, do all the work myself with them. Planting trees, but I don't baby anything. I plant fence rows and I let birds plant trees, and I just don't mow or spray fence rows. I don't spray any poison on the place.
What so you're planting trees in the pastures or like outside?
Yeah, I'm trying to get them out on the pastures. I've got a little orchard that is hit or miss, but every time I buy a tree with a label on it, something eats it or it breaks off, and it just
Yeah.
so I throw nuts down fence rows. I let the birds plant them. I bought a tree spade for the skid steer 2 years ago, and every time I've got a volunteer in an inconvenient place, I can just go scoop up a 24-inch ball and put it somewhere else. And I just figure that if a tree wants to live, it's going to do it. There are a lot of them that want to live. They're just in an inconvenient place, or they're not necessarily the species you want. And I'm more of a, all right, guy, here's your chance. Move it over there and try to keep the cows from eating it. And
And are you
but
just
it means,
interested in trees, or is it for like forage for
well, I want to
cows,
be.
or you want to sell nuts or shade for
I'm
the
not.
pasture, or
I'm not
how do
doing
you think
more
about it?
shade than anything else. I find shade is the most limiting factor because we do get hella hot here, and it's the most limiting factor on controlling where the cows go to graze. They want to go downhill to the ditches where it's cool. They want to be under a shade tree. They want to be out of the wind. So basically, every 5-acre subdivision fence I've got is a potential hedgerow. So I'm sticking saplings in it. I'm trying to promote that fence. I put a second fence up while they're in that paddock to try to prevent them from beating them to death. And so, but I prefer anything that has a nut or a berry on it. But we transplanted a couple of Siberian elms that grow like weeds and make good shade, and they don't get the Dutch elm disease like the American elms, and they want to live, and I need shade. So
I had a couple of those grow up in our asparagus patch, and like after a year, it was like 7 or 8 feet tall. It was just like
awesome.
awesome tree, but you're not gonna stay here.
Not in the asparagus patch. That's right.
Yeah,
So the tree spade kind of opened that up.
nice.
So did you put permanent fences for your subdivision, or like permanent electric, or permanent or not electric?
I use all electric high tensile on plastic posts. The posts they don't make them anymore. They were a composite post made out of recycled plastic and wood chips, and they were making them here in Missouri, and I haven't been able
Pasture
to find
Pro,
them
right?
since. Yeah, and I haven't
I
been able to
used
get
I
them
used a
since.
bunch of those, but I noticed when this fence project, I couldn't find them.
Yeah, it's kind of a bummer. I'm pretty impressed by them. I mow a few off once in a while. I mow under the fence rows mechanically with a sickle bar mower to keep the weed load down. I don't spray, so I do have to tighten a few things up, and I've occasionally mowed a few off running around the pastures trying to I have to manage weeds too. I've gone to this more intensive grazing model where I'm putting a lot of pounds per acre for a very short duration and trying to rest it. I get that theoretically, but I'm a cucklebar farmer too, so I'm not compelled. I don't know yet. Jury's out on that. I'm running hundreds of thousands of pounds per acre very intensely for a very short period of time, but Missouri grass in June is nothing like Missouri grass in August. You know, I I don't know. There's a lot of theory out there. I hear a lot of guys regurgitating their success stories, but not having been on their place or witnessed their actual situation, I'm like, well, it sounds an awful lot verbatim like the book I read, So I
Well,
don't know.
what
I've
kind of
never
changes
witnessed
have
it
you
myself.
seen? What kind of changes have you seen to the pasture since you've been doing this kind of rotational scheme? Like, has it seen improvement? Yeah, I don't
Well,
know, or just how has it changed?
I consider that one difficult too because it's 13 years. We're in our second severe drought in 13 years. And so I'm a genius in the years when we've got plenty of rain. And I'm a dumbass in the years we don't. But since you're talking about an animal whose life cycle from conception through a mature reproductive calf is 3 years or something, they're not fungible. You don't just take them and trade them out. If the grass goes away, you don't just go sell them. You can't just go buy extra ground or rent extra ground. So once you've got a number of animals, you're kind of locked into a program. And so there are years when I could run those cows across that place and I could never keep up. I'd be clipping behind them, trying to beat it back a little bit. And then there are years where they'll run through it once, man, the season's over. Well, now what do I do? I've rotated through one cycle. Grazing is probably worse than short-term overgrazing. Letting them muck around for 7 or 8 days in a 5-acre paddock is a guaranteed way to ensure that you get rid of everything that they want that's palatable, and you only grow things the cows don't want to eat. And so I think that low intensity, like open grazing, I think there's as much trouble with that. But I find it very complicated because I don't think I have it figured out. If you can't flex up ground, you have to pin them up in one pen and feed them hay, even when you've got grass on the ground to give it its recovery period. That doesn't fit my sustainable model either.
Yeah.
So, I mean, some years it's great, some days it's not.
You said undergrazing is worse than temporary or overgrazing. Undergrazing is like, can you just mow? Like if you undergraze, can you just mow behind it and kind of get it down? Or what's the issue with undergrazing? Just out of
Well, when
curiosity.
I say undergrazing, I'm talking about too long of access. They'll go through and bite the same plant more than once. They'll graze out the things that they want, but they won't eat the things that you want gone.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
So if you put them in ultra high concentration, they'll destroy everything. They'll either eat it or they'll step on it. But if you don't do that, then they'll go through and they'll just graze out the sweet stuff that they want or what they're picking on at that particular time. And then the things that you would prefer not to be there will continue. They won't get them trampled out.
So I'm probably a few years sort of behind you in experience. I think we've been at it about 7 years now with our cattle. And this year was honestly a massive setback because, with the fire, I mean, this year we just kind of put them out and we didn't really like, it was just kind of we kept them healthy. That's about what we did. But I suspect, the problem you're talking about with kind of managing I'm starting to see the necessity. I think when I think about our place is kind of having some summer grazing, just some annuals to graze on that kind of pick up some of the slack at different parts of the year to kind of make that cycle up. So you have some forage at different times of the year, because there's just going to be times, August and September, there's not going to be stuff to graze. And I'd like to, and I think part of the program here is going to have to be, I'm going to need to have, some sorghum sedan or some, some variety of corn that doesn't really head out much by then, something for them to graze during that period of time. I'm thinking that might be a good strategy.
Well, and you're going to have to drill some grain, and it's going to, you're going to have to drill some seed in, and you're going to, in order for that to work, plant some turnips, do whatever. The September rains may not come. I mean, it's part of when I think about Alan Savory and when he talks about his holistic management and he talks about everything's in context, the fact that he's broadened that up, not just to mean context of the pasture or context of the rainfall, but context of your employment situation, house situation, economic situation, land prices in your neighborhood, all these factors. And it's a very complicated thing, and you can only charge so much for a cow.
Right.
You're only going to get so much. You can keep charging more and more and more, but I just think that technically it's fairly complicated. When I listen to the influencers, guys that I really appreciate that are making a living and doing their thing, guys that are doing the rotational grazing on scales like mine up to your size are probably selling seed stock. They're not selling beef. They're selling replacement heifers and bloodlines of beef, bulls. And so they'll sell some beef. But I think that on a small scale, to try to go through that whole process of raising them out, pretty tough. Right now we're all talking about grain finished versus grass finished versus industrial. The 18-month to 30-month window, that difference, my 30 months minus their 18 months, that window is where they're picking up a major advantage. They're able to finish a cow out in so much less time. Now they're using the industrial system and they're feeding them grains and they're doing all this stuff, but that's not insignificant. The difference, some guys may be grass finishing at 24 months. They're putting them on some high test stuff, probably under a pivot. They're irrigating that and they're feeding them, and we're too temperate here for it.
It's speaking of where you're at, I just wanted to mention that I have had chance. I've spent a lot of time in Missouri. I grew up in Southern Illinois, and didn't notice at the time, but the few times I've been through Missouri lately, I just look around. I'm like, man, there's a reason it's. I think it's the second biggest cattle state in the country after Texas. Is that right?
Pretty good size. I think we're 1.8 million head or something in Missouri
Yeah, and
alone.
you can see why. It's beautiful cattle country.
Yeah, the rolling ground kind of inhibits some of the crop stuff. I mean, along
Yeah.
the Missouri River and points north of the Missouri River, you've got more crop. Some guys around here crop stuff they shouldn't. It's a little too vertical. A lot of that ends up in Truman Lake. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely potential. We sell quite a few beef.
Do you think we've talked about like the difficulties of doing this? I mean, young guys or families, or, or whoever who want to get into this kind of thing, you know, what are the biggest challenges? I mean, land prices, one, just capital in general, but you know, is this a promising future for young people to get into who don't
Well,
necessarily have family
it's my
legacy of it?
primary, it's my primary hedge. I see it as the hedge for feeding myself, feeding everybody in my family, and feeding all my neighbors. So
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah, you have me on the hook.
nothing else matters,
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you
Yeah.
can get that 20 acres, or whatever, figure out how to do it, eat a little crap and use your day job, but tie it up in a few saws and 20 acres and get that done with your life. And then for me, the goal has never been, I don't plan to feed the world. I'm not trying to. It just so happens that most of my practices align with the goals that are stated, like the environmental goals, the soil conservation goals, the wildlife goals. It just so happens that I think that's the correct way to try to manage the land so that it'll pay me back with the least inputs. It's not that I set out with that goal. My goal was to make sure that nobody in my immediate family or friendship would ever be food insecure. You'll always be able to you can come to my house and we'll get you some beef, and I set that as a priority, not as an afterthought or as some larger conceptual thing. So, I mean, I'm certain that guys could go out and it's going to be difficult. When I hear the social stuff about going to the small towns and having to deal with the small town mentality and the cliques and stuff, well, yes, you are an invader and you're coming into their circle and they will begrudge you. And a lot of them are old and curmudgeonly, but you're going to find opportunities, I think, in these places. I mean, I run kids through the shop right now, trying to pay it back a little bit from what I received
Mhm.
when I was younger. But, expectations are unrealistic. I
Yeah.
think that I've watched a lot of the younger folks super interested in this in the last 15 years, through social media and stuff. And then I watch the influencers peddle it. I'm like, well, that's theoretically, I think you're right. But it's a lot of that when I hear it, it sounds like verbatim regurgitated out of the last one I heard, and I'm like, well, everybody's just
Yeah.
repeating everybody. Nobody's been ever been out there in the rain at midnight with their hand up a cow or something trying to solve this problem for this particular animal. So I don't know, you know, the biggest thing that has helped me is I'm debt averse. I don't borrow a lot of money and I look for bargains and I use old shit and I drive old trucks. I do what old farmers did 80 years ago. They talk about this golden age of farming, but every time you look at a drawing or a picture of an old farmer, man, his fingers are crooked and he's skinny and his shit's got flat tires. And it's just, I don't know, man. I prefer to be a little more realistic. I like to help people out. I'm more of a tactician than a strategist on this, and I can help you get through something, but I can't solve America's food woes or the
Yeah.
youth's desire to be part of this. All I can say is you're going to have to get in there. I don't really have a plan for that. I certainly don't think it comes from above. I don't think that I know that your political leaders in Washington don't care.
Yeah.
You're so far down on the bottom of this.
Yeah. Well, Nate, you've been on this beat for the last couple of weeks. The whole, monopoly of food system, meat packers, Argentinian beef. You wanna riff on that and open up that side of things?
Nate, or me.
Well, Nate's the one who's been hammering it, so I think maybe
Yeah.
Nate, if you wanna talk, and then Nigel, I want to get your kind of view on it because you guys are pretty close to the whole issue.
Um, it's been fascinating. I've been really absorbed by it. I got totally sucked in. I kind of
You're
try
gonna
to.
have a whole podcast series about it with a bunch of smart people too, right?
Yeah, I'm going to be talking to a lot of
From
people
a-
about this kind of stuff because it's just been fascinating to watch, because I think you see a lot of people who are fed up and stuff starting to boil over. Like a lot of people um, in the farming and ranching in particular, with cattle specifically, are genuinely pissed right now, because what happened was essentially there was a good cattle market, been a really good cattle market for a number. It's been climbing for a number of years, and I mean, long story short, uh, I think it's fair to say, like, not hyperbole, like, Trump kind of crashed it. I mean, the prices come down. He said, I'm going to import Argentinian beef. It set off a firestorm. Price has gone down, and people are just pissed. And, his ag secretary is, spinning in circles, trying to, do damage control, but people aren't really buying it. And it's just the thing that I'm most interested about is, it seems like there's always friction, but there seems like there's been a real wedge that's widening between actual producers and the snake in the grass lobbying organizations that say they represent them but don't really represent the big agribusiness. And there seems to be like a pretty significant wedge being driven right now. um and that's real important because that wedge needs to happen, because we have a political class, and then we have the lobbyists who purport to speak for farmers and ranchers, who don't. They speak for the huge business interests, and they're all basically owned by just a few companies. And it kind of runs itself, and they ask the government for more money, and the government, through the USDA, filters more money that goes through the farmers to the companies. And it's definitely just a big monopolized racket at this point. And I think for a million reasons, it's kind of continued to be this way. Um, People do things the way they do them. Farmers and ranchers do things the way they do them. They do things because they're at the mercy of the prices that they get. I think that's one of the big things that you've seen a lot of independent ranchers and independent producers in the last few years is kind of, it's not ideological, the reason that they direct market to beef. It's because they want to set their own prices. That's basically, if you direct market beef, you're saying, I'm out of the commodity system. I'm not fucking with these people. I'm going to sell to my customers. There's a lot of challenges to that, because the packers own, most, like, there's 4 meat packers that own most of the slaughter capacity in the US. So if you want a direct market, there's huge challenges there that have to do with regulation. It's not
There's
an
always
accident.
all these loopholes, like your customers have to buy a share of the cow,
Right. And
something
there's
like that, because you can't get USDA processed unless you're suing
exactly.
these packers, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So at my scale, what I'm doing right now is that's what I do. I sell a live animal to my customers, who, and then I take them to the processor. They pay the processing fee, and they have the half or quarter share or whatever. If I wanted to sell it by the cut, which I probably will at some point, I'll have to go to USDA. I mean, that's going to add a lot of cost. And it's not an accident that it's that way. It's not an accident that it's hard for a, independent producer to do that. That's by design, in my opinion. Um, it's to funnel everything through that sort of corporate monopolized system. And if you're outside, they want a piece, and the government wants to help them get a piece. So that's sort of where it's
And the
at. And
government gets a piece as well, I'm sure.
pardon?
And the government gets a piece as well, I'm sure. I mean, there's a
Always.
reason that they have so much influence with the government.
The government has the gall to charge every producer, I think, what is it, a dollar a head for a checkoff program that you have to pay, that goes directly to fucking lobbyists who are lobbying against your interests. If you're an independent producer, it's a huge racket. It's an incredible racket. And I'm happy to see this wedge being driven between a lot of producers and these fake lobbying firms. And it's going to be interesting where it goes, because people seem pretty not ready to behave themselves yet. So I'm kind of excited to see what happens here.
I mean,
So that's my
two different
synopsis. There's no question there. I guess that's my synopsis. Nigel, I'm curious your perspective.
Well, and I watch you, and I know what's going on, and what people's positions are on this. Kate told us all the other day, Ms. Meat Lady, that we're basically not even within the margin of error in this industry. And she's correct. It's just, I cannot do a single thing to increase price from the producer's end. All I can do is hold my cows until the market conditions are more favorable. Eventually they age out. I have to pour more feed to them. All I can do is react to prices by not selling or selling sooner. I can't if I'm selling into the market. I can do this thing where I'm selling customs, which I do some, at $4 a pound on the hoof. It's pretty hard to justify going and messing with a customer for halves, holes, and quarters and going through the whole education, getting screwed over by local processors. Those guys are trying to scrape by and make a living too. And they're not charging enough to process a beef, in my opinion. And so I guess what I'm saying is that at our scale, or, as individual producers, I just have no leverage. And Trump and Rollins and all of them will look you right in the eye and tell you that. You are in Rome, and there's a Senate, and there's an emperor, and there's the mob. And if you look at the mob walking out of the grocery store and the way they take care of themselves, I guarantee you they don't care about grass-fed or regenerative. I think we get isolated and walled off. And so as far as the whole thing is concerned, all it takes is one president of either stripe with the stroke of a pen to change a tariff policy or to play video poker. And as long as he's stirring up the shit, people are going to fish the muddy waters. And you've got this mass in the middle, the mob, that plays these rackets, and they arbitrage this against that, and they're constantly doing this. And it has nothing to do with beef or anything else. I don't have confidence in the rage or the energy in this by the producers, because ultimately they've all got bank notes, they've got kids going to school, they're going to do what they're going to do. The only thing that changed when beef went from 2.25 a pound at the sale barn to 4.25 a pound at the sale barn was it completely kept me from being interested in doing individual custom sales to individuals. I'm like, well, my numbers work because I don't have any debt, and I could go ahead and get the barn done, or something else could happen, and I don't even have to deal with that other side. I'm not into movements. I think if a person talks about a movement and they're currently in the movement, it's like somebody talking in the third person. It's just a weird thing to me. I'm like, movements are something we describe 10 years from now. What was the movement? It was Ron Paul. It was whatever. It was Bernie Sanders. It was this movement. But so many people are in this thing, and we trying to push it from that end. It may exist. It may be the thing, but trying to push it from I don't like the narrative drive towards it. I think that individuals need to raise their beef. They need to find their racket. But man, I think it's tough. For all the reasons, I think that, they're doing fine. I like Jason Mauck because he's got a grain thing going. He's got his stock cropper thing going. That dude's hitting it. He's in the system, in Rome, as a Roman, doing it. And he's not bogged down. He's got his opinions, I'm sure. I hope we'll get to hear him soon. But he's got his opinions about
Stay
the
tuned.
way things are structured.
Stay tuned.
You're getting them. I know. I think I saw that the other day. So I'm excited about that. And Greg Gunthrop is in the system, and he's a Roman in Rome, doing Roman stuff, within the system. But man, those guys are pretty rare birds. What would be best for me as an individual producer of 15 to 20 available calves a year would be if I could get either a co-op or an agent that could handle that on the intermediate scale, not the state of Missouri scale, not maybe the county of Henry scale, have an agent that will handle that end of it. There should be enough in this for all of us. There should be enough in it that somebody could make money doing that. But it's all confounded with all these government subsidies and different tax advantages and absentee ownership. It's a mess, man. I don't know. Sorry, I'm not very optimistic about it. I just don't see the That's the only thing that happened with prices. I don't think prices are going to move that far because American fundamentals haven't changed. Our cow herd's still down. People are still eating tons of beef. They'll eat it if it comes from China or North Korea or wherever it'll come in. They'll go to Walmart and they'll buy it. The mob is just fickle. And so you got to find your little tribe. You got to do these things. But I don't know how many guys are actually, I think you probably do better selling seed stock. A lot of these guys that started out selling a lot of meat sell some meat, but they're selling bull semen or they're selling replacement heifers. They're selling seed stock and name, brand, and they're good communicators. They're good guys. They're doing their thing. I don't know. Everybody in my county ate a half a pound of beef a day. I think it pencils out that we have to butcher 17 cows a day in my county to do that. And so there should be 17 cows a day being processed in this county that would supply this county. I prefer to draw my circles around metropolitan areas by population in different sizes. And when those circles overlap, Kansas City has a circle of influence that touches St. Louis's circle of influence, and Springfield's creeps in on that. I would like to see everything within those circles be able to sustain that population, and if it can't, if we have to stretch that string further, that's where you start to get into weird stuff.
Yeah, that's why we can't avoid that, and that's to me the thing about this is, we just can't. I don't think we can avoid some sort of a big political fight about this. I just there's too much power concentrated in too few hands, and that's not going to change unless somebody changes it. So I just don't think there's a way to avoid the fight.
Like it, I just don't see a path. I mean, how many beef ranchers are there in the United States? And can they all hold their cows or their calves for 2 years to choke it out?
Definitely not.
There's just not enough of us to matter. I mean, there's just more. I didn't write a big check to any political party this year, and I just don't know. I just don't think we have enough friends. I don't think that our customers are our friends in that. Everybody I know complains about the cost of beef right now. The cheapest, most grain-fed, plastic impregnated beef on the planet, and they're still complaining about the price of it. And then, the president's telling us that it's our fault, because we're greedy. Those of us who are out there, I mean, I treated calf scours and 6 calves in the rain for 2 days this weekend. It didn't increase the value of the price of my animals, it just increased their cost. So it's I don't know. So, I mean, I think that your market is pretty fickle. We went through the recession in 2008. I had taken over a family cabinet shop with my little brother. My father died unexpectedly. And things were pretty tight in 2007. And then 2008, we hit the recession and really had to stretch to keep that thing going. And I don't really know where to go with that. It's just you have to find your way. And nobody's going to help you, and you can't trust customers to help you. The only security in that market is ultra high end. I can't build cabinets for my neighbors and make a living. I can't realistically raise beef for my neighbors in my neighborhood and make a living. You have to patch together a cabinet shop and a beef operation and a couple of really wacky stair jobs, and your wife works and your kids are grown, and you do it. But your market is fickle. Your market's fixing to be tapped out. People are really broke, people don't make a lot of money. And so the market's fixing to be tapped anyways. And so you're either going to sell ultra high end customs to very affluent people, or you're going to have flat tires and truck around in the mud, man. I don't know. So I think the security in the market, I just think if the average customer wants to go buy potato chips or Monsters or whatever they want to buy with their disposable income, whether that be food stamps or whatever, that's their choice. And looking at the physical condition of most of our citizens, kind of they place their vote, So I'm just not as optimistic about.
On the other hand, people are still buying beef, and they're buying beef at expensive prices.
Yeah.
Still, they're still buying it.
I don't know what to do about it. I'm not going to be able to out compete the lobbyists. Crony corporatism has captured it. I'm not sure, man. I'm watching. I'll vote with you if I can help. I just
Yeah, I
don't know
guess
what else to do. I just keep.
I'm probably dumb. I guess I'll retain a little bit of hope that there's an American history of busting these big companies, and so I'm gonna retain a little bit of hope that we can do it.
I hope so too. I'm not against it. I just don't think I don't see the leverage. I talk about the land use issues and the tax. We've talked a little bit about that recently. That's pretty abstract. There's no hope of that going through. So I'm a little naive about plenty of things, I think.
Well, let's talk about that anyway. I was wanting to bring that up
Well,
because
can I say one last thing to wrap?
sometimes
So
when you're
can I
go
wrap?
ahead.
I just want to wrap before we jump, because I don't think there is economic leverage, right? And that's why, and a lot of my friends, especially on the right, don't like when I say this, because the only leverage is political. You just like, there's no choice about it. It is, you got to kind of be like, well, you got to use the levers of the government for this. There's just no other way. There's no other leverage. There is no economic leverage we have over these people.
Well, there's opt
Um,
out.
there is, but
I think
that's
you. I
I'm
don't
not I'm
know.
not
I mean,
bullish on that one myself.
yeah, it's a tough
Well,
racket.
let me ask you this, Nate. If where does the leverage come from? Nigel was saying, individual ranchers don't really have any leverage. So who's actually going to have the political capital and desire to push these reforms through? Like who is the constituency that's going to cause them to do this?
Um, I I do think that in rural areas, farmers and ranchers do carry a lot of weight. Are sort of very, I mean, politicians have been hiding behind them for 30 or 40 years. Like that, to push through all kinds of corporate friendly stuff, and the farmers have allowed themselves to be co-opted by the Farm Bureau and other such snakes in the grass. But a lot of that works because it's for the farmers, and there's a real sympathetic view of that. And I think it's less than it used to be, but rural areas are very, very, very dependent on the farm economy and needs a strong farm economy. And so rural areas are still pretty sympathetic to agriculture. And so if farmers can sort of remove the yoke of their lobbying organizations that are actively working against them, I think there is still a lot of sympathy, and there's a lot of need for rural areas to have strong farm economies. They're almost dead, practically speaking, in terms of like local, healthy, independent farm communities, but not totally. And I think the beef industry is actually the perfect place for a last stand, because beef is harder to corporatize than other forms of, I mean, pigs, chickens, grain, you know, it's a little harder to do that with cattle. So I think it is kind of maybe like a last stand against the corporatization of everything agriculture. Beef is kind of a fitting place to do it. And so I kind of see it that way. Uh, and I think leverage would have to be public sympathy. It would have to be um, uh, a long history of American sort of tradition of antitrust, of kind of taking on nakedly corrupt monopolies. Because I mean, you take any sort of like, you look for 2 seconds at any of these companies, and you're like, wow, those are bad fucking dudes. Like, it's just like obvious. And so I think that's the leverage. The leverage is uh god damn, this sounds naive, but the leverage is doing the right thing.
Yeah, yeah. I'm more of an agorist on it, and I'll engage in gray markets and illicit beef transactions through marketplace and Craigslist and backup pickup trucks. I've
Yeah.
got more confidence in that, but I'll do it with neighbors and known parties. I mean, that's something in general that I think a lot of the young kids have a lot of trouble with. We used to do illicit trades in high school that, nowadays a lot of kids would have trouble with if it doesn't involve a pill or something. You know, you just, I do a lot more handshake deals now in my 50s than I did at 20. Everything had to have a contract, it had to be booked. Every time you book something, somebody has an opportunity to take a point off of it. Everybody wants to get a dime out of something. So now I'm pretty comfortable with just a shake and a wink and a move on down the road. I think that's a viable alternative. I don't think I don't think that Cash Patel is going to run us down if we're transacting, in a few ribeye barters with another neighbor that has some other service. I'm actually very bullish on that, because if we dump cash and everything gets booked through a digital system, then people will tap into every nickel that passes through your bank account. Somebody's going to get a little piece of that. And if it's 1/100th of a cent, that's billions of dollars to somebody, over time. And so I'd like to see a lot more kids doing illicit, bartering and handshake trades and unbooked deals, trading and other things. I'm a lot more bullish on that than I am thinking that I don't think that my fellow American citizen is going to go to bat for me when they're going and paying $30 for a ribeye at Walmart. They don't care what happens to a beef man, So we don't have any power there. So I'd much rather just involve, not illegal trades or anything, just informal. The informal economy is big in my world, in my worldview, because it's nobody's business what I'm up to or what the next guy's up to or what the next guy's up to. And the young kids that run through the shop, they want a W-2 form. They want that book. They're wanting to get right into that system. I'm like, man, the more you can flake out of that, you at least need to speak the language. You don't necessarily want to do it all the time or count on it. I think that a parallel non-book system should be part of everybody's vocabulary, at least.
Agree with that.
And trade a little bit. Don't charge everything. Call it gift economy, call it whatever you want. Just giving everybody else an opportunity to get into your books. It's kind of a sketchy operation, because you just don't know who's going to be running the books next, who's going to be looking. So I don't know. That's part of it.
I mean, I just want to say, just to comment, this is a fascinating conversation, because the two different theories of change that I think we're all kind of trying to achieve the same goal. But yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, Nigel, I think I agree more with you in the sense that I think that's something practical that each of us can do in our own small ways. Nate, I wish this movement, as anti-trust movement, the best, but I just don't know. I will support it.
Well, we were
No, I don't
sold a lot
either.
of things.
I don't either. I mean, I think it's
Yeah.
borderline hopeless, but I feel like compelled to,
Yeah.
like, we gotta,
Preach it.
if there, yeah. I mean, I feel
Yeah.
like I want to, bringing the fight to these sons of bitches is important.
You kind of already described it, but you used the word agorist. For those who don't know what that means, do you want to talk about that, and then that could probably lead into kind of your views on proper taxation and stuff. I think that would be a cool conversation.
One thing about me, I don't read a lot of contemporary stuff. I read some older stuff. I guess I'm not very well read. So my definitions are very juvenile when it comes to capitalism, when it comes to communism, when it comes to whatever. I'm fairly simple on it. As far as agorism is concerned, my first agorist influence was probably Carl Hess, who was a former Goldwater speechwriter who ended up getting politically trapped by the IRS, and he had to basically go to ground. So he went from being an aircraft pilot, Politico in the big DC, plenty of money and all this, to basically being wiped out by political lawfare, the same stuff we see nowadays. He got wiped out. He basically became a welder hippie, and he was involved in the 70s in urban food movements and Mother Earth News type stuff, and so that's where I was influenced by that as a kid. Grandpa had Mother Earth News magazines around the toilet, and I was familiar with that stuff. And then he became reluctantly involved with the libertarian movement, but he was big on informal economies, man. He was like, man, why do you want any third person to know what two people are up to? All that does is it feeds a bunch of middle feeders, these shecklers in the middle. And so when I use agorism, it's basically I would prefer to starve Leviathan to death by non-participation. And I do it since food is one of my main things. I use that. It's low barrier to entry. You can probably guerrilla garden your way into some profit on right-of-ways and hiding in the woods and things, on public lands. And so I'm in the system. I'm still in Rome, but I tend to lean that way, that I would rather starve Leviathan to death and just not, they had no business in my business, and that's how I see agorism.
Yeah.
It's
So, like,
like
if somebody who's interested in food, like even a very small symbolic act, like growing something in your garden and trading it with the neighbor for some help on your roof or something,
certainly
like
nobody
just
else's
whatever,
business.
right? Like, and
Consenting adults.
there's no money transacted, or even maybe there is cash transacted, but it's cash. It's not there's no bank accounts associated with it. It's not getting written on your tax on your tax forms.
Well, it's
You're just you're exchanging goods and services with somebody else, with money as intermediary or not, just as a trade.
maybe giving a gift to a friend who happens to
Yeah,
give you
and
a
then they're
gift.
giving a gift to you, right? And then it gets
It's
it
just
gets
whatever.
interesting because it's like, well, if you ask somebody, somebody who's into like an economist, and they're like, should we tax all these things? And they're like, yeah, because all these reasons, because the government needs all this stuff. But then you ask, well, if I give a gift to somebody, should they tax that? They're like, no, probably not. Well, what if they give a gift back to me? No, probably not. Right. But then it's like, okay, well, then what if we trade something and we exchange cash? Oh, well, then that should be taxed. It was like, well, that's actually kind of incoherent, right? Like it doesn't actually make sense in that worldview.
Well, it's from the very basic standpoint that is anybody entitled to a second of my time or an ounce of my labor? And that's where we get into my fairly recent appreciation of the land value tax thing, or whatever, that all wealth is derived from land, whether it be mineral extraction or growth of food or whatever. No
Forestry.
man created land. No man created that. Therefore, every man is entitled to it, a percentage, and therefore I I have come to accept that everybody is entitled to a little bit of that take. And if they're not going to be allowed to use it, then they have something coming. So it's the only tax that I find as being moral, because I don't think that anybody's entitled to force me to pay for something I don't want to use. It's the land. And so it's the simplest system that I've come across. I have as little hope that that's going to happen as anything else. But from a personal moral position, it's my perspective that that's the gift of God, and that if I'm going to exclude other people from using it, I don't have a problem paying up for that. But you still purchase the land, and you still purchase the right to it and the improvements from the individual that came before you. You're not paying tax on the barns and on the sheds and on the water pumps. You're paying on the natural value of the land itself. At some point, you'll have to come to, some guy's going to put in terraces and swales and water retention systems, and his land's going to be more productive than the next guy's. So trying to divorce improvements from the inherent value of land is a challenge to that system. Just access to a particular piece of land because your granddaddy had it, or because some rich guy bought it and then 3 bankers traded it down, that they deserve all that rent for that land, when it's really the people who are being excluded from access to it have some of that coming. And that's the only way I can come to a tax being moral, if you don't agree to it. If you don't sign up to it, if you don't agree to pay a certain amount, say you sign up for a 10-year tax to pay on your car or something, and you agree to do that, then that's okay. But not being able to opt out of that's just people stealing your heartbeats. So I have this fundamental problem with taxing people for breathing or for working. There's a myriad of other problems with it.
Yeah. So let me how is this different than just say a property tax? Is it because the property tax, you build the house, you make the improvements, and then you're taxed on that as well because you made
Well,
improvements, and now
you're
you're going to be
taxed on the
taxed on it?
labor, so you're
And
taxing people for
mm,
producing the work.
yeah,
It's really, and nobody's entitled to that.
right.
Why is somebody entitled to an extra $20,000 out of somebody because they decided to use their money and their labor to build a house or build a barn or build a productive asset? It's,
So
So it's kind of like the
for
potential of the
instance,
land. Go ahead. Go ahead.
the barn is worth, $60,000, right? Like that's somebody who built it. That's the value it has. Somebody buys the barn. right? I think that that's worth that much. I buy that barn. So those two have agreed on the value of the barn, have exchanged money. What the hell does anybody
Nobody's
else have to
business.
do with it? Right. It's
Nobody's
just
business.
these two,
So the
they
improvements
agreed what
don't.
the value of it is. That's
Right.
it.
That's between them. So you're
Right.
entitled
And
to
that's what you said.
collect money for building the barn. So the value is on the inherent value of the land. And where it gets a little
Right.
crazy is where you start doing land improvements, you start retaining water, you start building up soil value, biome, whatever it is, assessing as value, make your land more productive.
Yeah.
Everybody in the neighborhood knows that that land's more productive because you put more compost and microorganisms into it. So the price of the land's going to go up. But nobody else did that, so they're not entitled to that improved value. So whether it's an inflationary rate of 3% of the natural value of the land perpetually, that's numbers thrown out. There are a lot of people that are a lot more sophisticated on it than me. I just come at it from the very basic principle, the moral principle that I'm excluding other people from using something that I didn't make. I paid another farmer for access to this piece of land. The banker took his cut. The realtor took her cut. The insurance company takes their cut every year, and I have a real problem with taking things from other people because of their productiveness or lack thereof.
So we've already kind of talked about this in the chat, but let's kind of here's this question that I have about this. So how it would kind of work, in my understanding, is that you basically the highest the person willing to pay the highest land value tax is the one who's going to be able to get access to that land.
I
Is
don't.
that
It's
like
my
like
understanding.
it's kind
The
of
person
bid
is
on?
willing to pay the most for that particular piece of land, I guess. But the tax should be prohibitive enough to prevent people from just buying in and buying it and not using it for anything. And I
Right.
think that's,
And so
if
I
you
think the good
acknowledge.
side of it, the thing that sounds really good is that it does encourage productivity. Like have, because if you're not productive, you're not making money, it's hard to justify, well, somebody else wants to do something on it and they're willing to pay, bid on a higher land value tax for it. And so they're going to get it. The thing that would concern me and that I think we'd have to adjust for is that, somebody like let's say a forest stand, right? And they want to come in, they're willing to bid high because they're going to cut down the whole forest, clear cut it, right? Kind of ruin the land. And then they're just going to, and then they're just going to get rid of it. Right. So like
Well, what prevents
what's
it
to
now?
discourage, people coming in it or developing it, right? Like building a condo on it. They're willing to bid on a higher land value tax. They're being more productive, quote unquote, in the formal economy. So what's to prevent that?
Whatever prevents it now, which isn't much apparently. I
Yeah,
mean, if you're willing to
true.
pay
I mean,
more,
yes,
you can just come
it's
in and cut it
already
off.
bad now. Yeah,
So I mean, there's not anything now. The difference would be that the rents are paid back into the citizenry as opposed to paid to the banker and the mortgager and the previous owner. I have to work through that a little bit too. I take measures to prevent erosion on my land. I have restricted riparian areas. I do all of that anyhow. Now, like I said in chat, I have to think through a lot of this stuff too. I have to go back to the zero that I don't believe anybody's entitled to my time. You're still going to buy that land. I think you're still purchasing the land. It's just that the tax rates would be increased. It's not going to work out well for a lot of grandfathered in farmers. If you're land rich and cash poor, you know, but then what's Denny say? The Twitter buddy of mine, Willie Denner, that talks this constantly. He's a market gardener up in Hudson Valley, man. He's got it worked out, and I'm still coming to terms with it. And there's a commercial lot there in town that somebody wants to use, but property taxes are such that it's unimproved land, and property taxes are so cheap on it that he's had it for sale for 25 years. He just changes the sign out every 10 years, and nobody gets to use it. It would be a valuable piece of land. Somebody could make product out of that. There are urban tracts that are worth 500,000 times what some rural tracts are. Take an acre in Manhattan, and people are willing to pay more for access to that limited real estate than they would that piece of dirt out west. So it's complicated. I don't think you've got any protections now that keeps people from doing any of that stuff unless the
It'll
state
be interesting to
confiscates it.
get this guy, this Twitter guy you mentioned on the podcast.
Well, I think so. I mean, as far as guys that have actually done something, he's successful market gardener for 30 years. He constantly putting stuff in the ground and taking stuff to market and raising some cattle and understands his single tax thing, you know.
talk about it after this selection in the chat or whatever
Yeah,
about
I'll hit him up about it.
him. Yeah, that would be cool. If you wanna co-host that, it'll be cool. Nate, I've been talking for a while. What do you got?
I think I'm underwhelming.
I like the idea, the basic principle of it, and I kind of, I'm similar, Nigel, in that like I like to get the basic contours of something, but when it comes to like the details of nitty gritty, it's well, speaking for myself, I kind of lose interest at a certain point of granularity. I'm kind of like, no, just the big principle, and I like the big principle of the idea of a land. Because I've thought about this a lot. It's land's just here. It seems to be like in some ways, like it's it should, in a way, it's a common property of everybody. Not that everybody owns it collectively, but that it's unique as a good. It's not like anything else. And it is, there's only so much of it, and we didn't, it's a very, very, very unique thing, and a very important thing. And so I like the idea of treating it differently.
It's just the source of all inherent wealth. Everything that man didn't make comes from Earth. Whether it's biological or mineral or whatever, topological, watershed. It's not something that any man did, and so if there's anything that is due to another person, it's having exclusive access to that, or right of stewardship, or however you see it. It's a special case. But see, whether we're talking about cattle or cow shares or land, the first step is to make something divisible, to digitize it, to pixelate it, and then people can start picking pixels out of it that don't add any value to anything. And so that, the minute that you've decimalized something, or you've put it into a commodity type thing, that's how it goes. That's because
watching this whole debate unfold. Watching this parasite load. That's a beautiful. It's exactly that's a literally true metaphor. Like, it's not metaphorical. It's actually literally true. And watching this whole debate unfold is so fascinating too, because it becomes so clear how abstracted everything. And I mean, it's not. I mean, I'll be the first to say I've been doing this for 7 years, and it has not been easy, and it's been quite a learning curve. Quite a learning curve. I have failed at a lot of different things and made a lot of different mistakes, but fundamentally here, there's a really pretty simple proposition. It's like an animal grows on ground, and you kill it, and people eat it. And that's a pretty straightforward chain. But if you look at the global commodity chain and shit like this, you might be confused into thinking, oh my gosh, it's so complicated. It's got to go through this, and it's got to be inspected here. And it's got to be
investing in commodity futures and all of this stuff.
To get safe food to the grocery store so that you can eat it is oh my gosh, it takes multiple nations and multiple agencies and shit like this, and it doesn't. It just doesn't. Like, it's all parasites every step of the damn way. It's not a complex operation. I think that that's something that when you talk about the informal economy, it's important. I think both literally just building a parallel system. I agree with that. And also it's important just to maintain this knowledge and memory that it is not complicated. Like, there's a real service there of just like maintaining in the DNA of people, in the collective knowledge of people, that like it is this simple. Actually, growing food for your neighbors is actually this simple. It's not complicated. It's not a multinational, multi-organizational affair.
No, but it is complex.
It is
Yeah.
complex.
It's difficult. It's a difficult rub. I mean, it's either it's complex or it's complicated. I think complexity is what's manufactured. It's a complicated deal, because you
Yeah,
are still dealing with weather and sentient animals that have a vote and different things. But no, I mean,
it's a
it's
different form
we're
of complexity. Like
being governed
it's
by
yeah.
obfuscating attorneys and lawyer types. When you let your government be operated by Harvard lawyers, you can bet, because no matter what the argument is, a dispute between any two parties, a lawyer is always getting paid. And so that type of person that is running things, that runs everything at the national level, they have an opportunity to muddy the water a little bit and fish its murky depths. That's the whole point. That way they can get a nibble, they can get a nibble, they can get a nibble. And before you know it, you've got 80% of the people are taking nibbles, and the people at the front and the back end are left out hanging. The people can't afford the food, and the people that are making the food can't afford to produce it. And
And this
because,
this goes all
but
the way
everybody in
back
the
to
middle's
like
fat, man.
this goes all the way back to like Hamilton versus Jefferson, right? Where like Hamilton's idea was that he wanted to formalize everything, get everybody into the system. That was part of the whiskey rebellion, the whiskey tax, and started taxing people on production, as well as sales, right? Like at first it was taxing sales, but now it's like if you have production capacity, you're being taxed on that. So there was this whole fight right at the beginning of the founding of this country of like these two different visions, and I think clearly Hamilton won. His vision won, and we're still living out the consequences of that. Anyway, that was kind of a non sequitur.
Doomer.
One thing. I mean, one thing that occurred to me going back to like the two theories of change that you guys presented, like Nate with like monopoly busting and political change, and Nigel with the agorism, is that I think they can feed each other, right? Like the more people that opt out, the more leverage they have, because people need to eat. And so the more ultimate political power that they'll have to not allow big government or big corp to tell them what to do, to dictate.
I'm really definitely a both type of person. And in fact,
Yeah.
by predilection, I kind of lean more in the other direction. But there are these points that you see, there are these choke points that prevent further, like, and those choke points have to, I mean, like, to me, it's like you have to mount some sort of attack at those choke points. So I don't disagree, with anything
Yeah.
Nigel's saying. I feel like there's selectively,
I
like, I'd
mean,
rather
is the
not. I'd
reason
rather
that
just stay here and grow my cows, and like I'd like to just do that, like that. But yeah,
is the reason that the meat packers have so much power, monopoly power, is that it's just it's economies of scale, right? Like, there's huge economies of scale of just scaling that thing up, just running tons of cows through through the processing and doing it at a large scale. And when you're doing things at a large scale, you're going to get political power. Is that
Can you
kind of the
imagine?
fundamental economics of it?
Do you, in your mind, do you imagine 340 million people? Like, I mean, when you think about that number, we throw out trillions now like it was no big deal. I always feel like everybody ought to have to write out every zero when they say a large number. It's inconceivable to me. 340 million people in this country eating food, the ones that are on the books. So
And so few people producing it,
it's
and
it's
so few people
right.
in big cities not
and so
producing it.
and then these packers, yes, they don't have to, when you're moving that much product, they don't need to make much money. So the scale is a big part of it. I mean, the other big part of the story is regulatory capture. Like they own the USDA, and the USDA makes laws that make it easier for the big guys to operate and harder for the small. Like, and they, and we've had laws since, the late 19th century that prevent monopoly, like consolidation of power, because that's sort of what happens at scale. They like corporations tend to merge together to further enjoy those benefits of scale and to not need to worry about competition, control the prices. So you have monopolization. 4 packers now control 85% of the supply. And so with that comes obviously a tremendous amount of leverage to continue to, write their own rules, to continue. So it kind of becomes
Reinforcing
this,
feedback loop.
yeah,
Yeah.
reinforce exactly.
Yeah. Well, guys, this has been a great conversation. We're about 90 minutes. I got to get to bed. It's about 10:30 here. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much, Nigel, for coming on.
Yeah.
I think you're just a really cool guy. I like you a lot. So thanks for coming on. Love you, Nate. It's been fun. Any last words before we wrap up?
Kind of just want to apologize that I haven't solved rotational grazing. I haven't solved the ability to get beef cheap to people at a profit. I mean, I'm glad to talk to anybody anytime
Well,
about any of
at
this.
least you're trying. At least you're working at it.
Yeah,
Most people are just
I'm
theorizing
not
about
going
it.
out to change the world, but I am
Yeah.
willing to talk to anybody about anything, anytime. I'm pretty open book about it.
Nice.
I appreciate a lot of you guys and a lot of people in these circles, in
Yeah,
this circle. It's a good bunch.
maybe I should throw out your Twitter handle is at Nigel Best, or what is your Twitter handle if you want to?
At Nigel Best 5, I think. Yeah.
At Nigel Best 5. You open a DMs. People want to pick your
Yeah.
brain about stuff.
Open book. I try to be available.
Cool.
So it's not
Yeah.
always what people want to hear and not always what they don't want to hear. I'm always sincere, whether it's useful or not.
That definitely comes across.
Well, the sincerity, I think, is one last thing I want to appreciate about that too. Is I think talking about the challenges. I did way back when I first started tweeting about this stuff. I shared a thread of my failures, right? Like just things I have done here. Like I snapped a picture of all the stuff that I've screwed up that I'd probably due for a big update.
That's what put you on my radar, by the way. Like I knew about you before, but that thread was okay. This guy is interesting.
Well, it got a lot of attention. I think it's important, and I appreciate what you're saying too, because it is hard, and it is not like, I mean, a lot of most accounts put forward like here's how great it is and here's how everything works, and sometimes you wonder, is this sort of just a regurgitated book? It sounds so familiar. I'm like, I'm pretty skeptical myself after having done it for a few years. I'm like, no, it doesn't. I mean, maybe it does if you do it for a while and get really good at it. But there's a process here, and I think people should know that the process is hard knocks. That's it.
Yeah. Well, that note, hard knocks. That's a good note to end on. Hard knocks, but get back up. Keep going for it. You can
Thanks,
do it.
guys.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
This has been fun. Take care.